We're standing in a wheat field right now because we want to stress if you have white mold issues on your farm, you need to raise a lot of wheat and corn.
You're not going to find them out in your wheat field. I was thinking,
Nope.
you know, it's a good thing Brian's not in real estate because location, location, location. How can we talk about white mold out here?
Because this is what you have to raise if you've got a white mold issue. And I will tell you, we have had white mold right here on our farm. But you know what? We've raised wheat or corn in this field for about 8 years in a row now. So when we go back and rotate to soybeans at some point, we probably will not have a white mold issue.
Well, here's the thing with white mold. Once you have white mold in a field, you're going to leave some of the sclerotia, which are basically the seeds for the white mold, if you want to look at it that way, in that field. And they can lay there in the soil for years and years. So if you've got a white mold problem in a field, chances are 5 years, even 10 years later, you could still have some white mold pop up. Your likelihood of a white mold problem is even greater. So you need to be careful with which crops you're raising, but also when you are raising a susceptible crop like soybeans or sunflowers, you have to be watching for that in the fields. And if you know you've got an issue, when you get to that time where the plants are susceptible, get out there and pre-treat with a fungicide to give some preventative help for this tough disease.
Well, the interesting thing though, when we talk about when the crop is susceptible, like in soybeans, for example, once soybeans start to flower, they haven't really taken in much white mold yet. It's interesting, the most easily accessible point for white mold to get in is on the dried up flowers, the dead flowers. So flowering is going to occur in the northern US sometime around the 4th of July when that first flowering is going to occur. So right after that, within about a week or so after that, white mold can start entering into the plant.
Now here's the other thing with white mold. It needs some warm conditions. It also needs some moist conditions. So if you're having a very dry summer, chances are there won't be hardly any white mold in your area.
But you probably won't have a great crop either.
Well, that may be one of the downsides of that. But on the other hand, if you're having a really wet year, or if you have lots of moisture just at the wrong growth stage for that plant, white mold can be more common. Also in soybeans, I should point out row spacing. When you've got narrow row spacings and there's not a lot of breeze moving through underneath that canopy, you've got more likelihood of white mold.
But you know, even on our farm in 30-inch rows, we've had some white mold. Yes, the incidence of white mold has been less when we've widened the rows back out to 30 inches. But where we have the best growth, the most lush growth, that's where you are most at risk. So for example, let's say you spread a lot of manure on your farm. We spread some manure on our farm, and where it looks like those beans are growing tall, they're up chest high, it looks like we've got 70 bushel bean potential, that is where white mold really sets in and really causes a problem. I know last year we lost 10 bushels on our own farm because and it's our own fault. We should have been out there spraying Domark, and instead we were spraying Headline or Quilter Stratego. Look, if you want to stop white mold in soybeans, don't use Headline, don't use Quilt, don't use Stratego. Spray something like Domark. That's got some activity on white mold. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to be great, but it's pretty good. It's a much better option than the other ones. That is something you want to take a look at.
Well, here's the other thing. Whether you're talking about sunflowers or soybeans, there aren't resistant varieties to sclerotinia white mold. You're still going to have some issues, but you may find varieties that are going to be more tolerant than others. So do look for that if you've got a problem. Maybe you've got a field like this that has a history of some white mold and you say, you know, I really need to put some beans out there for my rotation. If you're just absolutely set that you're going to plant beans, treat those soybeans with a fungicide like Domark right about the time that those flowers are out there, you're in full bloom, get a Domark treatment on. In sunflowers, it'd be the same way. Look for approved fungicides for sunflowers, get them sprayed, and then also, you know, just do whatever management practices you can do. Do some tillage out there if you can, plant a little wider row spacing if you can, you know, anything that's still going to make a decent crop on a regular year. But if you can use those practices to help you out in a tough white mold year, it'll lessen the pressure.
Okay, a couple more things real quick. Some people are talking about using Cobra on their beans, and that has fungicidal activity. I think it's more, it makes the leaves drop off the plant, so more air moves through. Whatever the case is, it seems like you have less white mold when you sprayed Cobra. The other thing is, well, we have problems in soybeans. I think the problems are far worse in edible beans and sunflowers, so make sure you're paying attention to those crops and getting those taken care of as well.
Well, it's part of the reason it seems like fungicide use is getting more common in edible beans and sunflowers because it pays almost every year. In soybeans, maybe those yield increases aren't quite as large as they are in some of the other crops.
Yep, and like we said, if you're really concerned about white mold, you've had major issues on your farm, just raise some corn, wheat, other non-host crops. for especially 2 or 3 years and break that cycle a little bit, sure, you're probably never going to get rid of all the sclerotia in your field, and that white mold, the Sclerotinia white mold, will probably pop up even 10 years later. But if you keep raising a bunch of non-host crops, you should be able to lessen the potential of major damage.
Well, crop rotation is nice for a problem like white mold, but it doesn't really help us out with our weed of the week. We're still going to see it. Can you identify this week's weed?